Hey everybody, this is Praxis. In this video, what I want to talk about are the implications of Trump having won the election as it regards prepping, preparedness, and the shit hitting the fan. I'm just going to give you a spoiler right off the bat. The implications of him having won are that there are no implications at all. It changes nothing. And in this video, I'm going to tell you why.
Better believe in your mind, 'cause it's everything. You could mold, shape, find almost anything.
So Trump won the 2024 election. This was something I didn't think was particularly difficult to forecast. In fact, I made a video suggesting that I thought that this was going to be the case. But despite the fact that I thought it was pretty easy to see that this was coming, there were a lot of people who were shocked by this event and a lot of people who were horrified by the fact that Donald Trump is going to be having a second term. And there are also people who have reacted with glee and think that the fact that Donald Trump is going to be coming back in 2025 means that everything's going to be great now. There's nothing to really be concerned with anymore. There's not going to be any wars. There's not going to be any civil conflict. There's not going to be a civil war. There aren't going to be wildfires. We're not going to be experiencing ice storms anymore. There aren't going to be major hurricanes. There's no reason to prep and prepare anymore because the second coming of our Messiah suggests that, it's going to be heaven on earth. There's that category of people. I want to talk to you in this video. And there's also the people, like I said, that were horrified and think that the end is nigh because of the second coming. Now, at the beginning of this video, I said that I didn't think that Donald Trump's election really has anything to do with prepping, preparedness, and what's going to be coming at us, facing us. The challenges and issues that we're going to be facing are essentially unaffected by his presidency. In fact, prior to him having been elected, there was a theory going around that I thought was interesting, not necessarily accurate or true or the real case, but I thought it was interesting that it seemed as though the Democrats were doing such a poor job of putting up candidates that were palatable to people, starting with Biden, which I thought was ridiculous, and that there was like a 0% chance that he would win. And even with Kamala Harris, I felt that it was a little bit more ambiguous as to how that was going to turn out until kind of right towards the end when it started becoming kind of obvious even to me. But it seemed like the Democrats were putting forward people that were not very likely to win, not very appealing options, not very appealing alternatives to Donald Trump. And even with so many people having participated in the previous election, there were a lot of the people that voted for Biden that just sat this one out because Kamala Harris was so unappealing. And the choices that the Democrats were giving people were so bad to the point where I never like explanations where the explanation of something is just that, well, they're idiots. They're doing that because they're idiots. Sometimes that's the case. Oftentimes that might be the case. But, sometimes people are doing things that seem foolish, maybe for other reasons because they've kind of got another game going on. And there was a theory going around, which I thought was interesting, that perhaps because the Democrats understood the challenges that we're facing in terms of our environmental situation, our economic situation, our geopolitical situation, all these things seem like they're coming to a head, very likely in the next 4 years or so. Maybe there was a desire on the part of the Democrats to, have a fall guy in there, or maybe Kamala Harris was put in there so she could be a fall gal. To have someone that they could pin the blame onto for what they felt was inevitably coming anyway. And then in 2028, they could sweep in and say, we're here to save you from the mess of the past 4 years. So that was a theory. Again, I don't know whether that was accurate or not, but it's an interesting theory and it does fit the facts without having to just do the intellectually sloppy explanation for just, well, the Democrats are idiots, so that's why I did all these stupid things. But the moral of that theory anyway is that things are baked into the cake at this point that really don't have anything to do with whoever is going to be the sitting president. The issues that we're facing environmentally, economically, geopolitically, they were going to be coming to the head whether it was Harris in there or whether it was Trump in there. And whoever happens to be in there is going to be the person who, inappropriately, because these things are baked into the cake, ends up catching the blame for it. But the fact that these challenges and issues are coming our way is inevitable, independent of who is in the White House. So if you think that Donald Trump is your savior and the fact that he's in there, I would advise you to rethink that, because when you're trying to forecast what future events are, it doesn't really pay to look at the individual people, the individual players, or the individual promises that are being made. What is important to look at are the base facts on the ground. In terms of the environment, we have a rapidly changing climate, we have population exploding, we have issues with our food supply, we have issues with transportation, we have issues with resource scarcity, and all of these things are coming to a head, whether or not you have your favorite pick in the White House. In terms of economic, we are adding something to the tune of like $1 trillion a year to the to our debt. Our deficit has never been higher than it is now, and the debt at this point just seems functionally kind of unpayable. In terms of geopolitical situations, that comes down to kind of population numbers and resource scarcity. All of these things are really baked into the cake independent of who is in the White House. And the only difference between one person being in the White House and the other is the solutions that they try to put forth in terms of solving these problems, whether they be environmental problems, economic problems, or geopolitical problems. But a lot of these problems, the solutions to them, at least in my opinion, is really kind of unpalatable. And I'm not going to get into geopolitical because then that gets into a lot of, there's a lot of moving parts to geopolitical issues, but let's just stick with environmental problems and economic problems. Environmental problems are something that the people on the left like to champion is the reason that you should put them in. If we could just get more Democrats into office, then we could solve all of these, climate change issues, and the world would just be, this wonderful, rosy place. They kind of sell themselves on that idea that we got all these problems, and if you put us in, we're going to have the solutions for you. The Republicans do the same thing with the economy. They talk about all the economic problems that we're facing, and if we could just pack the government full of Republicans, then we could, start some austerity, start having some sensible spending, not have all the wasteful spending. Wasteful, is depending on your point of view. And, we can save the world if you can just pack enough of us in. Now, these two problems, I think, are very similar in so far as the solutions to either of these problems, to actually solve either of these problems, are so unpalatable to the populations of the United States that even if either party had full license, was completely unshackled and able to do all the things that they promise on their platform, like the Republicans have this like something 2025 plan, the World Economic Forum that the Democrats are oftentimes associated with has this, God, I don't remember what the 2030 thing, whatever you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. They have all of these extreme solutions to problems. And when I say extreme, I don't mean that in a objective sense. I mean that in a sense that if they were allowed to do these things, if the Republicans were unshackled and allowed to implement a lot of these extreme economic reforms, if the Democrats were unshackled and were allowed to implement a lot of these extreme environmental reforms, if they were able to do that, if they fulfilled the promises to their bases and actually made good on their threats to go down the roads that they're talking about going down, even their bases themselves would hate them. The level of austerity that would be required for meeting a lot of the fiscal responsibility goals that the Republicans are talking about would be so unpalatable to everyone, including their base, many of whom I think don't really understand the benefits that they're reaping from the system right now. Unsustainable as it is, absolutely, it is unsustainable, and we're going to get to that in a little bit. But people don't understand the benefits that they are reaping from this unsustainable system. And if this unsustainable system was shifted to a sustainable economic model, even the base, even the people that champion these things, even the people that will have loud shouting matches about how we need to do this and we must do this and it's unsustainable if we don't, even those people would hate the result of those measures if they were put into effect. The austerity would be so unsettling to people that the pitchforks would come out. In the same way with the Democrats, where they talk about the environmental reforms that would be required to get us to an actual sustainable planet where we only need one planet to sustain our population. At the moment, it's something ridiculous. It's like dozens of planets are needed if everybody lived with the same standard of living as people in the United States. To get down to a place where one planet could actually sustain us, the changes in lifestyle for people in terms of not being able to travel, forget in your car, like, not being able to travel in airplanes or any of that kind of stuff, not having access to things being shipped and transported all over the world, the level of austerity in living would be horrifying to people. And I don't say that to put this type of lifestyle down. There's a lot of ways that I live that are considered horrifying to people. In fact, I'm trying to shoot this video right now using this little light here because we have failing sunlight. It's at the end of the day. And once the sun goes down, we stop getting electricity in the house, and then we go to a lower energy kind of mode in our entire house for the evening so that we don't max out our batteries. This is just the way we live. It's fine. It's a very enjoyable way of life that keeps you in touch with the natural rhythms. I love it, but a lot of people would find the way that we live horrifying, and I don't even live extreme enough for my standard of living to only require one planet Earth. To actually get down to a place where we would only require one planet Earth, even my standard of living would be considered extreme, and you'd have to go even further than that. And even people on the Democratic left, the people that have those screaming matches that we must do this, we're unsustainable, we have to get to sustainability, they would hate the results of those promises actually being kept. Now, why am I talking about these two things, and what does it have to do with Donald Trump having been elected? Well, whenever a politician gets in, they've made all sorts of promises. One side of the country thinks those promises are wonderful and hopeful, and the other side, at least at the moment, thinks that those promises are horrifying. And you get the whole new list of people. It's like, I'm leaving the country. Yeah, we'll see about that. We'll see about that. Everybody's always talking about how they're going to leave, and then nobody ever goes anywhere. Both on the left and the right, I would remind you. So the hypocrisy cuts in both directions. But whenever a leader gets in, they have all of these promises, and some people are horrified by their promises. In particular with Trump, a lot of my liberal friends are saying they're horrified by this whatever Project 2025 thing that's going on, which I honestly haven't read myself because I don't need to. Whatever is in Project 2025, and I'm sure there are horrifying things in there, whatever is in there, if it would truly impact people's lives in the here and now in a way that would be as disturbing as people find it, they will never do it. Because not just Democrats would rebel against it, the Republicans who supported Trump would themselves rebel against it because it's the kind of medicine that people beg for but never actually want to take. And again, the same is true with those environmental things. If we had some kind of extreme environmental savior, president that got in there and actually wanted to make these changes, even the Green Party people would rebel. Not everybody. I probably wouldn't rebel. But the vast majority of the base of these parties that try to thrust this stuff up into the public spotlight would never actually go for it. Because I think in a way, the fact that we have a left and a right, it allows our population to kind of almost be schizophrenic, where the left knows that they can go way off to the left because they know the right will pull them back. And the right knows that they can make statements, again, that go way off to the right because they know the left is going to pull them back. And no one is ever actually going to make good on those threats because even their own base would rebel against it. So if you are concerned about what Trump's platform is and you think it's just going to tear the country apart, remember that. Politicians know that. And especially Donald Trump knows that. Donald Trump, I'm probably going to be pissing off a lot of Trump supporters here, but I think Donald Trump primarily is into being president for his own self-aggrandizement, for his own, don't have to phrase that any other way. That's what he's in it for. He likes being complimented. He likes being seen as being in a position of power. He likes prestige. And he would only continue to have that as long as the mob loves him. And he's smart enough to know what he can do and what he can't do to retain the love of the mob. And he knows that if he made good on a lot of these problems, even his own base would rebel against him because it's medicine that our populations beg for, not ever thinking that they're ever going to have to take. Just on economics alone, people always talk about, they pay too much in taxes, and there's an argument for there that, for shrinking government. And I think that the federal government would benefit from being shrank. In fact, that's one of the things I loved most about Trump's first term is that the federal government became kind of dysfunctional because there was just all this infighting, and it almost reduced the federal government because Trump was not very good at wielding the powers of that office. It it reduced the functionality of the federal government down to a place where I think is more appropriate, where the federal government kind of took a back seat to the states. It's more like the federalist approach to things, where the federal government has its role, but its role is prescribed and it is constrained by the Constitution, something that I think a lot of presidents, prior to Trump forgot, and I don't know whether Trump did that on purpose or by accident, but that certainly seemed to be the way that it was, is just that the federal government was doing less. Now, there is an argument for the idea of shrinking the federal government, and I don't mean to conflate the idea of paying taxes with shrinking the federal government. I think that in a lot of ways they're two separate questions, but people will oftentimes complain about their taxes, and they act as though the burden of society is on their back, in terms of, paying for schools and roads and all these kind of things. But for the vast majority of us, we are not paying anywhere near, our share of things when it comes to paying taxes. The vast majority of taxes are paid by very wealthy people. Now, I know there are people that are uber wealthy. Maybe these are the Donald Trumps of the world, where they've got all their kind of tax schemes and they kind of get around it, and they end up, they only paid like a quarter in taxes for some fiscal year because they set up all these kind of organizations. But for people in that upper middle class and the upper middle class, they pay an enormous amount of money in taxes every year. For people who own businesses, they pay through the nose for taxes. I know people who have started businesses, and because of the way you're able to write things off or not write things off, there are people who have had to pay more in taxes in a given year than they actually made because of the way they kind of amortize equipment and things like that. The tax structure for people who have an awful lot of money coming in is incredibly extreme in terms of how much those people pay. The types of tax brackets that someone like myself is in, and like people who are in kind of like the middle class or the lower middle class, we're paying practically nothing compared to people who are in these upper tax brackets. So when people like myself talk about wanting to reduce taxes, we don't realize that we get a lot more benefit from the tax system than we do, say, the pain of paying taxes, because compared to people who make an awful lot more than you and I, we're paying kind of peanuts. So at this point, we have a pretty good deal. And I think a lot of us don't realize that. Again, this is all completely unsustainable. You can't just run your deficit up $1 trillion, $1.5 trillion a year every year and expect that to go on forever. You can't keep polluting your environment forever and ever and ever and expect that to go on forever. The idea of sustainably created products, the idea of sustainably farmed food, people think about that as being like, oh, it's kind of touchy-feely. That would be kind of nice to be like sustainable. Well, what sustainable means is, well, here's the opposite of what sustainable means. The opposite of sustainable is unsustainable. And if something's unsustainable, it's guaranteed to end. And that is why I host a prepping channel, and that is why I would encourage you, whether you think that Donald Trump was the worst possible candidate that we could have, or if you think that he is a second coming of Christ, whatever way you view his presidency, I would encourage you to continue to prep and prepare, because these hardships in the future, they're not going to be implemented by a president. You're not going to have draconian economic austerity measures implemented by Trump or anybody else who made the kind of promises that Trump made, because they know what the results would be and they don't want to be blamed for what the impacts of that are. In the same way, if you have a Democratic president who is really pushing an environmental agenda, they're never actually going to push it to where it really would need to go, because they know what those results would be and people would hate them for it. That said, despite the fact that no president is ever going to want to pull the trigger on any of these things, there is a gun and there is a trigger, and it will be pulled at some point, but not by a person, but by the circumstances of the ground itself, by the chaos of the actual ecosystem. And I mean that both in terms of the natural ecosystem and of the ecosystem of our economics and all the human created systems that are on the edge of a precipice, balancing, kind of waiting to fall. These systems have an entropy in themselves, and they do have that trigger, and that trigger, again, will be pulled, but it will be pulled at a time not of our choosing, and not at the time of the choosing of any leader that we may or may not have elected. So I would encourage you, continue to prep. Don't be concerned over any one particular political leader, because any political leader that has any kind of a mind at all knows their role, and the word leader in our society means very little. Leaders pretty much follow the mob. They give the mob what they think the mob wants, and they hope the mob loves them for it. That's largely what happens. They don't do any actual leading most of the time, like a parent might lead their family. Because, as anyone who has a family knows, if you're the parent and you have kids and there's some medicine that they don't want to take or something that they don't want to do, and you push it through anyway, you know how they feel about that. And the mob here in the United States, here all over the world, is the same as kids who don't really know how good they have it and are ready to blame whoever takes their wonderful, magical, present state of living away from them. No politician is going to voluntarily do that. And for that reason, I don't think anybody really needs to have any real concerns over Donald Trump or anyone else, but you do need to have a concern over the reality, because the reality is eventually going to fall apart. Things that aren't sustainable are unsustainable, and things that are unsustainable come to an end. And that is why you prep. That's it, and thanks for watching. Hey YouTube preppers, if you enjoyed this video, here's another that I think you might like. But before you click on it, I wanted to take a moment to thank all the people you see on the right-hand side of your screen. They help to support all the work that I do here over at patreon.com. If you'd like to join them and get your name added to the list, the link's below.